So Conor McGregor has announced that he will be fighting 3 times in 2020, and it left the media asking a lot of questions of who are those 3 opponents going to be. It also left me asking the question of why are people so quick to say he's going to beat Cerrone at 170? That's a tough test. Cowboy at 170 is a really tough test for McGregor, but I also think that he will be beating Donald Cerrone on January 18th at 246. And we're asking what's going to happen afterwards. If he wins, very big ifs are going on right now, okay, for these 3 fight predictions that are going to happen in 2020. The second fight on his list, I feel like everyone knows what it's going to be. So like Masvidal, I feel like that's what we've known. Like he's going to fight Cerrone first of all. That was the first fight of 2020. Then I think around April, May, something like that, he'll be fighting Jorge Masvidal because that's a guaranteed. If Masvidal doesn't fight Nick Diaz, he's waiting for the McGregor fight and that will be known. If we hear Masvidal fighting Nick Diaz in March, the McGregor fight's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But if we hear that Masvidal is going to take some time off and he hasn't been announcing fights for a while, it's almost safe to assume that he's just waiting to see how the McGregor versus Cerrone fight goes down and he's going to plot his move after that. I think that McGregor is 100% going for Masvidal in his second fight. There's a level of trash talking that a lot of people have tried on McGregor. People have tried abusing him with things. Gaethje has tried just completely abusing him, calling him this, calling him that, calling him this. But what Masvidal's done to McGregor is almost more annoying for McGregor because he's kind of just said, no, that dude don't want none of this. Like Gaethje said, yeah, me and you, let's fight, let's do it anytime, any place. You bitch, you won't sign the paper and all that. Yeah, that's cool. But Masvidal, the way Masvidal handled the whole talk between him and McGregor has been very dismissive if it ever happening. And I think that's annoyed McGregor enough for him to say, hang on, is he that dismiss? I've just been champion until I lost to Khabib. I was a 2-weight world champion. Why is this guy dismissing me? I fought at 170 before. I beat the recent man that he beat at 170. Let's make the fight happen. I feel like that's the next fight he wants to get. I also think, and I saw Brendan Schaub on the JRE episode talking about how after the Masvidal fight he wants Nate Diaz and he wants to go money, money, money. I don't think that's going to be the case. I really don't think that's going to be the case. I actually think we are very likely in seeing this. And I only think that McGregor will fight Nate Diaz if this happens. Because if Nate Diaz does nothing and McGregor somehow beats Masvidal, there's a lot of ifs going on, guys. You're just going to have to roll with me here. If he somehow gets past Masvidal at 170, which I think is quite unlikely, but it could happen. You know, upsets happen in MMA all the time, so it could happen. He could get past Masvidal. If he gets past Masvidal and Nate Diaz has done nothing, I don't think he fights Nate Diaz next. Unless in June or International Fight Week, we get McGregor versus Masvidal for the BMF title, and we get Nate Diaz. Oh no, he won't. Never mind, it's his brother. Never mind. Sorry guys, I was just trying to fit in Nick Diaz into the situation, but there's no way Nate and Nick Diaz would fight each other. There's no way, right? There's no way they'd be that brave to fight each other. They're obviously too pussy to fight each other. Oh well, Nate and Nick Diaz, just keep being pussies and don't bother fighting each other. They'd never be that brave and cool to give that fight for the fans. Imagine if they fucking did that shit. They'd never do that shit. But I think that a good thing to happen would be McGregor versus Masvidal and then Nate Diaz versus someone else as the co-main event. Because if Nate Diaz sits out on his ass after a loss and McGregor just beats Masvidal, McGregor's now looking at Khabib at 155, Covington Usman winner at 170. He's got options. He's not going to look behind him and go, yeah, I want that Nate Diaz trilogy, rather than look ahead towards title belts. That's not what he's going to do. And I think if Nate Diaz can come back and get a good opponent on the co-main event, I think that would be a great time. A great night of fights. If we could have McGregor versus Masvidal, and then maybe Nate Diaz versus Leon Edwards, or Nate Diaz versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Something like that. Some interesting guy on the co-main event. I think we'd be in for good business. Because if Nate Diaz beats them, which to be honest I don't see happening, but if he beats one of those two guys and boosts himself back up with a win, and a good win, and moves himself up the rankings, then I could see McGregor taking the rematch, or the trilogy, with Nate Diaz. But unless Nate Diaz comes off the couch and fights someone and gets a big win, I don't see McGregor taking that back step. Unless he's planning that he's going to lose to Masvidal. Which, to be honest with you, if he loses to Masvidal and fights Nate Diaz in a trilogy fight at 170, it's a great fight. That's a really good fight. A really, really good fight to have. And it'd let him bounce back once more. So we'll see what happens with McGregor's fights leading forward. With the whole Khabib thing, I could see it happening, but I really want to see what goes on at lightweight first. Because, guys, Ferguson could easily beat Khabib. I think he's going to, okay? If Ferguson beats Khabib, all of a sudden, McGregor's like, fuck Khabib. I want Ferguson. If I beat Ferguson, I just beat Khabib by default. You know, even though Khabib beat McGregor, if McGregor goes in there and beats Ferguson and looks like a better version of himself, people are going to... He can say that he just came back to fight Khabib and he was feeling bad and his foot was a balloon and all this shit that he comes out with. And then he can get back in form and fight regularly and then look at the Ferguson fight and say, yeah, I like me some of that Ferguson. And we'll see what happens. I think he can get a win there, though. I really think this is going to be a big test of McGregor. Is he going to make the comeback that a lot of people are predicting him to make? My mind is running wild on potential opponents. I even like a Covington versus McGregor fight, okay? I like a Woodley versus McGregor fight. Let's talk about the names that aren't even being brought up. And you saw it there where I was talking about Ferguson. There was a pause in my brain of thinking about other opponents that aren't even being mentioned here. McGregor versus Nick Diaz. McGregor is fun. One thing you have to say about McGregor, he brings the fun to MMA. Because he fights anyone. Okay, he wants to go up and fight Masvidal after Cerrone at 170. Nightmare matchup for him, but he wants to make that fight happen, which would be an amazing fight for everyone who watches it. I can't wait for 2020. It's going to be the best year of the UFC ever if McGregor beats Cerrone. If McGregor beats Cerrone. Because if he loses to Cerrone at 170, it's tough. Then there's only maybe the Nate Diaz trilogy, but not really. I don't know. It'll be very tough if McGregor loses to Cerrone. So all of this talk and all of this speculation, he has to beat Cerrone. And if he beats Cerrone, we can talk everything else. We can talk Masvidal. We can talk Nate Diaz trilogy if Masvidal doesn't work out for McGregor and he loses, which might be the case. We can talk Ferguson Khabib winner. You know, we can talk Gaethje even if who knows, Gaethje might be lightweight champion by the end of 2020. You never know. We got to see how things play out, guys. We got to see how things play out. GSP at 170. Well, maybe GSP wants a bit of the BMF belt. So we'll see. I feel like right now at welterweight, the title belt is the least interesting thing going on. I'll be honest with you guys. Jeff Neal, Mike Perry is very interesting to me. The title belt is very interesting to me. But that BMF belt and that Masvidal, McGregor, Nate Diaz, GSP conversation is, to me, more important than the actual fucking title. I can't wait for 2020. We got a bunch of options, and if McGregor can win and give us those fights, at least one of them, at least can we see McGregor Masvidal? Even if Masvidal wins, I want it to get to the stage of McGregor versus Masvidal. Because if Masvidal beats McGregor, he's the next McGregor. He'll then beat Nate Diaz. He did what he did to Ben Askren and got a lot of fame off of that. He beat Darren Till. Then he beats McGregor. He's the biggest star there is if McGregor decides to retire after losing to Masvidal. So we'll see. We'll just have to see what happens. I think a lot of people are making these videos under the impression that McGregor's going to win all of these fights. You know, like I saw Brendan Schaub and Joe Rogan going, I think what McGregor's going to do is Cerrone, Masvidal, then Nate Diaz. Money, money, money. And then just leave. But there's a lot of ifs that come into that. Is he going to beat Donald Cowboy Cerrone? Is he going to beat Jorge Masvidal? Even more unlikely to happen. Is he going to beat Nate Diaz in a trilogy? These are the questions that McGregor will have to answer. And I think a lot of them will be answered by his return against Cowboy Cerrone. Because you can beat Cowboy Cerrone all you want. But if you make it look hard, people are going to assume a lot of things about the matchups in the future. If Conor McGregor goes in there against Cowboy Cerrone and has a Nate Diaz rematch kind of style of fight where it's back and forth, but he edges a victory due to early damage that he did to Cerrone, it's not looking good for McGregor at 170. But if he goes in there and dusts Cerrone in the first round, he joins a very select club of people. Darren Till, who was a top 5 fighter at welterweight. I've got something in my eye right now. Jorge Masvidal, who was a, fuck! My eye! Jesus Christ. I'm fucking pissed off today, guys. Jesus Christ. He joins Masvidal, and Masvidal beat him in the second round. But it was kind of the first round anyway, because Cerrone got saved by the bell. So if McGregor can go in there and make a statement on Cowboy Cerrone and dust him in that first round, then we can talk about all these other fights being somewhat interesting and compelling. But if he goes in there and he edges his way past Cerrone, or it's tough and Cerrone has big moments in the fight, I don't see the rest of the fights being compelling as much. So I'd love to see him go in there. As much as I love Donald Cerrone, we need Conor McGregor to go into that ring, or octagon, whatever the fuck it's called, and dust up Cerrone in the first round, and then we're off to Sizzler, you know? Then we're off to the road of paradise. Then we've got all these fights to talk about. But until then, I don't like the attitude of the MMA media, because they're talking like Cerrone's just going to lay down in front of McGregor and let him beat the shit out of him. Which ain't going to happen. I think it's going to be a tough fight for McGregor. I do think he's going to win in a devastating fashion in the first 2 rounds. Not easily. It's not going to be easy at all. So we'll see. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Click that button there. See you later. Goodbye. And goodbye.